Now, Snailji, it's your turn. So in this session, we're going to address that, that you are immigrating to US. Of course, immigration, that you are coming here on a long-term purpose, that you're going to establish yourself, not only the business here, but establish here. So you work for your own firm here in the US on L1A visa and get a green card. So now Snail will take the charge and will take it forward.
Great, great. Thank you, Naveen. Do you mind if I can share my screen?
Yes, please, please. Hold on. Let
I
me stop.
think,
Yes.
okay, thank you. Okay, so first of all, I want to say good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us. As Naveen and Ajay has mentioned, the US is open for business and you're in the right place. You have this unique opportunity to speak with, get your questions answered and learn about forming a company in the US. What are the benefits of doing that? Potentially get an L1 visa, and then how to set up your e-commerce business. So this is a tremendous opportunity for those of you joining today. So let me just step back a little bit and tell you a little bit about my background and what I can do in this process for you to expand your company in the US. So I'm an immigration attorney. I have been in practice for over 20 years, and the focus of my practice is US immigration. And I help many businesses that are foreign-based expand in the US by helping them set up the structure and the infrastructure that's needed in the US to potentially apply for the L1 visa. So let's talk about the L1 visa. The L1 visa is a temporary non-immigrant visa. It has dual intent, which means that you can have a short-term goal to come to the US and also a long-term goal to apply for a green card. It allows a US employer or a company to transfer key people who are executives and managers from one of the foreign companies based outside the US to the US office. It also allows foreign companies that don't have US operations yet to open up a company and apply for what's called a new company L1 visa. So today I'm going to talk about what is the new company L1A, and also go over briefly the fast track to the green card, because if you have the L1A and you qualify for the L1A, you're considered a priority worker, which means you get classified under the EB1C preference category. And I'm okay with answering questions if certain specific questions come up during the slideshow, or we can also wait until the end. I think the information that I'm going to provide should answer some of the questions that the participants have. So I get asked all the time, what is the benefit of an L1? Why should we do an L1A? Well, the L1A allows the foreign company to expand in the US because it allows them to send a key individual to start up the operations. You certainly can do all of this from India, where you have an agent in the US, you are running your company in the US from India, but at some point, you may require the key owner, the manager, or executive to actually travel to the US to further expand, to hire US personnel. So that's what the L1 allows you to do. The nice thing about the L1 is that there's no maximum investment required. Many individuals in India have heard of the EB5 visa, which is the direct investment green card option, which requires investing, over $900,000 or $1.2 million. The L1A is a really nice alternative because there is no magic number. You can invest as little as $100,000, upwards of $500,000. It's really what your foreign company requires to expand in the US market, okay? The L1 also allows you to live and work in the US. It includes bringing your dependents, your spouse, your children. So long-term, you could be in, short-term, you can be in the US living and working, your family is here. At the same time, you could be pursuing a green card option, and everybody would be included in that. Children must be under 21, of course, And there are some ways to protect their age if they are approaching that 21-year mark. Okay, the L1 also gives you the ability to travel back and forth. There is this misconception that if I have an L1 visa, I have to stay in the US. That's not true at all. You are able to go back and forth between the two companies. So there is no restriction on travel. Also, as I mentioned, it is a path to the green card. The other benefit or advantage of the L1 is that there is no educational requirement. So unlike some other visas like the H-1B, which requires a minimum of a bachelor's degree, the L1 does not have that requirement. You only have to show that you're qualified for the role as the executive or the manager, okay? The L1, if you already have an existing company in the US that's established, it's ongoing, and you have some employees, then you are able to travel to the US for a 3-year period. And if you don't, however, you are given a 1-year period to start up your operations. And the maximum amount of time an individual can be in the L1 category is 7 years. And our goal is to get you that green card before that 7 years period is up, so you don't have to worry about leaving the US. There's also no annual limits on the L1 visas, unlike the H-1B, which has the annual cap. Spouses are also permitted to work. So if you are applying for an L1 visa for yourself as a principal L1, your spouse would be able to travel and work. As soon as they get to the US, they're able to apply for a work for a social security number. There's no longer the requirement to apply for a separate work permit. There was a new policy that went into effect in January of this year that allows you to do that. So the biggest advantages of the L1A is this section called the new company L1A, which allows the foreign company to set up operations and transfer the key manager or executive. You don't have to already have your US company in operations for many years. You can start the operation now and apply for the L1 visa, okay? So here I have some information about the basic and general requirements of the L1A. And the first one is a qualifying relationship. In order to file for the L1A, there has to be a foreign-based company. It could be a parent company, it could be a subsidiary, an affiliate. You need to have a qualifying relationship between the company outside the US and the US company. And in discussing, if you're still in the very early stages of forming a US company, it's really, really important that we have these discussions early on so that we can make sure that at the time of filing the L1, we can show that there is a qualifying relationship. So for example, in the foreign company in India, if you have 5 partners, if it is a partnership firm and you have 5 partners, we have to make sure that the managing control or ownership of that entity is the same as the US entity, because in order to have the qualifying relationship, you need to have common control and ownership of the 2 entities, because there has to be the same individual or group of individuals that can make decisions on behalf of both of the entities. Okay, and I'm talking about 2 entities only, but many times clients have businesses outside India. So they might have an operation in India, they might have an operation maybe in the UK, in Dubai. So that's not a problem, but we have to make sure that there is at least one qualifying entity between the US and the foreign company to satisfy the L1 requirement. Okay. The other requirement is doing business. The company in the US has to be doing business in at least either the US directly or another country through the qualifying relationship, the qualifying organization. Okay, so for at least 1 year. So if your foreign company in India has been in existence and operating for 10, 15 years, you already satisfy that requirement. okay? If you are a new business in India that started maybe a year ago, I would say you need to wait until we can at least have 1 full year's of financials to show that there is a foreign company that's actively doing business, okay? The third key requirement is 1 year employment abroad. Now, the individual that gets transferred to the US as the executive or manager has to show that they have been working for that foreign company for at least 1 full year within the past 3 years at the time of filing as an executive or manager. So how do we show that? So sometimes we have individuals that own the business, but they don't receive a salary. Okay, they might get some type of remuneration. So we have to take a look at their personal income tax return, the company tax return, to show that the foreign national has been employed as an executive or manager. And if they haven't been employed, then we have to wait, okay? Because at the time we file the L1 application, we have to have proof of that 1 year continuous employment outside the US. So the key to that is if you have a B1, B2 visa and you're going back and forth, let's say over the past couple of years, because you're scouting locations, you're looking for warehouse, that's fine. You certainly can do that on the B1, B2. But that period of time that you're in the US does not count towards meeting that 1 full year of employment outside the US. So again, when we first start discussions with the L1 possibility, we go over all of this. We look at the taxes, we look at the personal income tax return, we look at the travel history, so that we are sure that we don't have an issue. Because the last thing we want is we put together the full package, we file the case, and then we find out that, you know what, within the past year, the foreign national has made 3 entries that lasted 6 months total in the US. So that would be a problem, okay? So it's really important that we review the travel history and the financials of the individual to make sure we can satisfy this requirement. And then the last requirement, coming to work in the US as an executive or manager, is not that challenging because that is basically perspective in nature. We have to show what is the foreign national going to be doing. In terms of the new company L1A requirement, this is going to require a business plan. And I'll talk more about the purpose of the business plan and why it's an essential, necessary piece in this application. But basically, you're coming to spearhead the operations. You're going to be hiring employees. Now, we talked a little bit earlier about not requiring or having the need to have US employees to start the business in the US, to sell your product. That's absolutely necessary, not required. However, for the L1, it is a requirement. At some point, your US entity will have to hire US workers. They don't have to be US citizens, but they have to be able to work and work for the company, because the L1 visa is not for an individual to basically act as an agent on behalf of the foreign company. Okay, it's not to station one person from the foreign company to the US to run the operations. It is an expansion of the foreign operations, and over time, expanding the US company in terms of employees, in terms of clients, in terms of turnover, because at each step of this L1 process and eventually the green card process, we have to justify why there is still a need for the foreign national to continue to work in the US on the L1A. Okay. So for the new company L1A, the Immigration Service allows the foreign national 1 year to enter the US and start up the operations. So you don't actively have to start doing business in the US before you get your L1A, but when you get the approval and travel to the US, you have to be ready to start up the operations. And that 1 year period goes really fast. So you have to have a plan. What are you going to be doing between the first month of your arrival to month 12? What are you going to be doing in year 2, year 3, all the way to year 5? So what I tell my clients is, if you are not ready to go full steam ahead with filing an L1, you have to understand how this works so that you can plan and strategize and say, okay, well, let me start up the company, let me see what it does. If I'm successful, and then maybe after 6 months, we can start the process in filing the L1A, because you certainly can work for your company in India, get clients, sell your product. You don't need employees, okay? But for the L1, once you are here, you're going to have to start your hiring plan, because when we have to file the extension for the L1 after year 1, we have to show that you have a staff that is now able to carry out the day-to-day operations. Because as a manager or executive, you can't continue to do the day-to-day running of the business, because you really need to be focused on working as an executive, setting the budget, the goals, overseeing the operations. Okay, you're not the one calling the clients. You're not the one talking to Amazon. You're not talking to logistics. Okay, because now you have a staff, and we're not talking about a staff of 10, 12, 15 people. It really depends on the needs of the business. Okay, so if you have a business where you're selling product from India, obviously you don't need to have 7 or 8 employees. Okay, but you will need to hire at least 2 to 3 to show the US government, the US Immigration Service, that this US company is actively operating and expanding. Okay, that's the key here. That at each step of the process, we have to be able to show that the US company is expanding. And also we have to show that there is this qualifying relationship and both entities are doing business. Okay. So for the new company, at the time of filing, the US employer has to show that there is an entity. We have the US company that's been formed. We have the tax ID number. We have the bank account set up, and the company has been capitalized. Okay, so all of this has to be done. We need the appropriate documentation, which of course our team that's on the call today is able to help you with all of this stuff. So once that has been formed, the account is set up, we can then put together that piece of the L1A. Okay. The other requirement for the L1 process is that we have to show we have sufficient physical premises. For starting up the company in the US, as was mentioned, we can do that virtually, okay? For setting it up, getting the tax ID number, not a problem. For the L1A, however, we do need to have physical space for the office. And that will depend on what are your hiring needs for year 1. So if for year 1, the business plan indicates you're going to hire, in addition to yourself on the payroll, 2 additional employees, we have to be able to show your space can house the 3 employees. Okay, so virtual offices will not work for the L1A. A shared office can work. We have to make sure that the individual that has the actual lease, that is leasing the space to you, is able to do that, is able to share the office or sublease from you to you. Okay, so that's a very important part of this new company L1A requirement. Again, I mentioned that the person that's being transferred has to show they have been working as an executive or a manager for at least 1 year within the past 3 years. Okay, so at the time of filing the L1A, so let's say we have an individual who has the US company set up and everything, and we anticipate filing the L1 in September of 2022. At the time of filing that case, the immigration will look back for 3 years. Okay, they have a 3-year look back period to confirm that the foreign national who is coming on the L1 meets that 1 year employment requirement. Okay, so we have to make sure that we have the appropriate financials to prove this requirement. Okay, and again, we have to show that the US company is going to support the executive or manager within 1 year of traveling to the US. Okay. Some of the key documentation that's required for the L1, there's quite a bit of documentation, actually. It's an extensive filing. We work with you, we work with the team in India, your team in India, to make sure that we have all of the appropriate documentation. And we also help you in preparing many of these things, okay? But on the US side, we need the US company ownership documents. So the certificate of formation or the certificate of incorporation, that's essential. We need the stock ledger, we need the corporate book, we need the Indian company ownership documents. Okay, who are the owners in India? Now, this is all important because we have to show that the owner or owners in India are the same as the US company, or at least majority of them are the same. So they do that based on a review of the documentation. Okay. We also have to provide evidence that the foreign company is doing business for at least 1 year in India. So that's shown through the tax returns, invoices, bank statements, anything that shows active operations of the foreign entity. On the US side, we have to show we have a 1-year lease at the time of filing for the new company. We also need to show the evidence of 1 year employment. That's done again through payroll records, tax returns. We also provide you with a template for the employment verification letter. This is quite detailed. They like to see the manager or executive in their day-to-day duties of what they do. How do they manage the organization? Who are their subordinates? Who do they oversee, supervise? That's also reflected in the organizational chart of the entity. And again, we will help you with preparing the documentation for that. Another key element in the L1A, new company L1A, is the business plan for immigration filing. And the business plan, I highly recommend a company that specializes in immigration business plans. Okay, this business plan that we file for the L1 is very, very different from the business plan you would need for investors or for a bank. Okay, it's very specific to the immigration eligibility and requirements. And so it's a very comprehensive plan that covers all of the activities and information about the foreign company, the beneficiary, and also what the plan is for the US company to expand. It's a 5-year plan. It goes into detail about the hiring, about the turnover, the profit. And so it's a very essential piece, because that's what immigration is going to be using, not only to approve the initial L1, but also the extension of the L1 to make sure that you've actually carried out your business plan. And I like to tell my clients that the business plan should be conservative, okay? It's not advisable to be too ambitious in the business plan, because if you set up very high goals and standards and numbers and you're not able to meet that, that is not viewed, it's not viewed well with immigration, okay, when you go in for an extension. So one of the things that I like to do with my clients is, once they have the initial draft of the business plan with the business plan company, we sit down virtually and review the business plan, make sure that it's going to not only get them the initial L1, but that we're going to be able to get that extension for year 2 and so on and so forth. Okay, so I like to go in and say, what are your actual needs? What do you think you're going to be able to accomplish conservatively? And then I like to estimate a little bit lower than that, so that when we go in for the extension, we can say, you know, not only did our US executive and manager meet those goals, we surpassed those goals, okay? So that is viewed very nicely by the Immigration Service. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about the business plan for immigration purposes. We also need bank statements showing the transfer of funds between the foreign company and the US company. And I will talk a little bit more about that later in the slide about transferring the money, how much and from where it should be transferred. We also need the beneficiary documents, the key individual or manager that's being transferred in the US. We need their passport, their degrees, their qualifications. And again, a degree is not required, but if they have one, then we would include that. We need a support letter from the US company that spells out all of the eligibility requirements, and we will prepare that for the US company. The filing fees currently for the L1A, new company L1A for immigration is $460, $500, and $2,500 for premium processing. Okay, these are fees that you pay to the US government, and it's required at the time of filing. So I want to stop here if anybody has any questions before we move on.
Yes, Snehal, there are questions here. Okay, so let's go step by step. Okay, Manmeet is asking, any minimum net worth or capitalization required?
Okay, that's a great question. No, there's no set number. Okay, that will depend on what the US company plans to do in year one. You have to be able to transfer at least enough funds to operate the US entity for year one. Okay, so obviously if your US company is going to be in selling your product from India, then you already have the stock. We can also many times use the stock to capitalize the US entity. Okay, you also need to have sufficient funds to pay the salary of that manager and the employees in year one. Okay, so we've done new company L1s for as little as $50,000 investment if the foreign company is going to be providing the stock that the US company is going to be selling, and to add profits to the US company. So there's no magic number.
Wonderful. And US company can be a core C Corp, he's asking.
Well, I'm not the tax professional, so I would refer that question to the tax professional. Yeah.
Sure. And what the cost of creating a business plan?
So that varies depending on the company that you use. It could be anywhere from $2,000 to $3,500. It really depends on the company. And I would say that because it is such an important aspect to the filing, you want to go with a company that has a good track record. And we certainly can refer. I have two companies that I usually work with, so I'm happy to share that information when we get to that stage.
Wonderful. And okay, next question is asking is, what's the total cost for applying L1A from company creation to the time one lands in the US, including yearly lease, etc., contracts that are part of documentation and eligibility criteria?
Okay, so I'm reluctant to put a number on this because it's so different for each company. Okay, we already know what the government fees are. We know what the business plan cost is. The legal fees for the new company L1A can range from anywhere between $7,500 to $10,000, depending on whether it's going to be for the principal applicant, other family members. Where are they? Are they going to be in the US when we file the L1A as a change of status? Are they going to be in India? And then in terms of the cost for setting up forming the US company, those again vary depending on whether you're going to have the agent here or US partner. So I think that in terms of the immigration and the business plan, you can estimate anywhere between $7,500 to $10,000.
Got it. Okay, no more questions right now. We can carry on.
Okay. And I have a couple of questions that I like to throw in as we cover some of these eligibility criteria. So one question I always get is, does the US company have to be doing the same thing that the Indian company does? Okay. And the answer to that is absolutely not. Okay. As long as there is a qualifying relationship between the foreign company and the US company, you can do anything that you want. Okay. You can, I have many clients that are in completely total different industries. Okay, I have a client actually who is in the mining industry in India, has a very robust operation, and decided that they are going to travel to the US and buy some franchises. Okay, so as long as we can show there is a qualifying relationship between the foreign company and the US company, the Immigration Service is not concerned with what line of business you're in. Okay, I think we touched upon this. What is the minimum amount of investment? Again, there's no magic number. Depends on the nature of the business. Okay. Next question is, how much turnover does the Indian company need to show to, to meet the L1A requirement? So the turnover for India, there is no minimum amount. Okay, no magic number. That's like my favorite phase in these questions. There's no magic number. It depends on a number of factors. What the Immigration Service is looking at is, does it make sense? Okay, it's like a common sense approach. If the foreign company does not have appropriate turnover or has not been in business for that long, why would they be looking to expand in the US? Okay, so take a common sense approach. If it's a marginal business in India with only a handful of employees, why are they expanding in the US? Okay, so those are the things they're going to be looking at. What I like to see is, of course, turnover is important, but how long has the business been running? I have some clients that have family businesses that have been around for 30, 40, 50 years. Longevity, that's extremely important. Even though there might be only 5 to 10 employees, the business has been around for 50 years. And those are the things that we would be highlighting in the application that we file. Okay. Alternatively, I have clients that have tech companies that they established maybe only 3 or 4 years ago. Okay. That have maybe not not longevity, but they have 300 employees already, and they've only been formed for 4 or 5 years. Okay. So then we highlight that although this company's only been around for 3 or 4 years, we have 300 people. They are ready to expand. Okay, they need to take advantage of this opportunity to connect with their US-based clients. And so they need to start up their operations in the US and send this key manager. Okay, is it profitable? So these are the things that we are going to analyze in when we evaluate when is the right time to file. Okay, and keep in mind that this is a collaborative process. Sometimes I have clients that connect with me. We go over all of these issues and we realize, you know what, the company is not ready yet. Sometimes because the employee or the individual has not been on the actual payroll and we can't prove that. So we have to wait 1 year anyway, which gives us an opportunity to try to make the application, some of these other issues stronger. And so we work together over the course of a year, we get all of the documentation, and then we can file. Okay. So how do you start the process for the new company L1A? Well, of course, you need the US company. You need to obtain the federal ID number. The US bank account needs to be open. You have to transfer the money. And at this point, now I'm going to talk about how much money should be transferred and where should the money come from. Okay. So the amount of money, again, there's no minimum requirement. The key to the transfer is that it needs to come from the Indian company. Okay. So the foreign company that is looking to expand in the US has to be the one that is sending the money to the US company. Okay. Sometimes we have clients that are sole proprietors in India. Okay, so they transfer money from maybe their personal account to the US entity. That's not typically a problem, but we don't recommend that because the whole underlying basis of this expansion is that there is a foreign operation, there is a foreign entity that is looking to expand in the US market. So that's an essential piece of this filing. So make sure before you start sending money that you are able to meet this requirement. Sometimes I have clients that have other friends or partners in the US that potentially are going to help them with that transfer, because maybe it's just easier. Maybe you have a sister or a relative that's going to, give you $25,000. So now that money is going from her account to the US company account. We don't recommend that, okay? Unless the sister is also going to have some type of ownership, okay, in the US company, which has to be minority, not majority. We don't recommend you doing that. So if you're still at the very initial stage with contemplating the type of entity, opening up the bank account, this is also something to keep in mind. Okay. You have to secure the
I have
lease.
a question with
Sure.
respect to your last slide. Now, my question is, let's say I'm an year-old company in India and making revenue, let's say $800,000 revenue in the US, not in India. I am doing operations from India, but my revenue is coming in my US company already because I'm providing certain services in US.
Correct.
Now what happens? I mean, because the money has to be transferred from India, but in this case, it's happening the opposite. The money is getting transferred from the US company to Indian company, but the company is in India.
Okay, that's actually a great question. So many times the clients have already started the US business because they have clients here. And so they're already receiving that money into the US bank account. That's no problem, okay? We would show that the capitalization, okay, has already occurred based on that income the US company has received, okay, and that the foreign company is going to keep that money or whatever the amount is needed, okay, to expand operations. If that money has already been sent to India, okay, then it's just a matter of the foreign company transferring it back to the US to show that, okay, that the company has been capitalized. And also, there are scenarios where the company in the US was started maybe 2-3 years ago. And for the purposes of having the US company for the US clients, so they feel more comfortable doing business with the Indian entity because there is a US presence, okay? But if it is not actively doing business where they have employees, they have a physical location, then we can still request immigration to treat it as a new company L1, even though it may have been formed maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And actually, we file a lot of these types of cases where they form the LLC most of the time in Delaware. Okay, it was created maybe in 2019. They have the certificate of formation. They have some funds that were collected by the US company, but it's not really doing anything active operation, okay? So we would go in as a new company L1A. Sometimes, however, in that scenario, if you already have the financials and it is healthy, then I say to my clients, why don't you start up some operations, wait to be able to file it as a regular L1A versus a new company L1A? Because the regular L1A would give the individual a 3-year approval. We would not need a business plan, and it is a less cumbersome process. Okay.
Got it.
So moving on, we have the lease, we need the business plan, I mentioned that, the document collection from both the foreign company and the beneficiary. These are all of the essential pieces that we need to file the L1A. I think I'm going backwards. Okay. So how do you qualify for the new company L1A? Well, first of all, there has to be a US company, an Indian company. I apologize. If there is no Indian company right now, then we can't file the L1A at this point. So if there is an Indian company, and you work for the Indian company and you can show that you've been paid, okay, by the Indian company for at least 1 year, then we can file a new company L1A. It is possible to do that. Okay, so that's a very important piece of this. So what is the timeline? How does the process work? Once we have compiled all of the documents that I mentioned in the previous slide, we file the L1A with the Immigration Service. They give you 1 year, okay? When you get that approval, you travel to the US and you start up your operations. You hire your employees, you start the expansion. Approximately 3 months before that 1 year expires, we file an extension with the Immigration Service. We show them that there is still a need for the US company to continue to employ this foreign manager, and that we need an extension for 2 years to continue the plan to expand in the US market. Once the extension is approved, the US company can start the sponsorship for the green card by filing the form I-140, which is under the EB1 classification. And traditionally, when that I-140 is approved, you're able to apply for the adjustment of status or consular processing for the green card. The exciting thing that's taking place over the past year is that because of COVID and the backlogs and the visa numbers not being used, we have an enormous number of immigrant visas that have been unused for the fiscal year. So those individuals that are in the US now that already went through the initial L1, file the extension, are able to file the I-140 now with their green card application. Okay, so the timeline generally is between 3 to 5 years of getting the initial L1, you would be able to file for the green card. Right now, it's closer to the 3-year mark than the 5-year mark due to these COVID delays and the excess immigrant visas that are available. And also, because you got a total of 7 years in the L1A, our goal is to get you from the initial L1 to the green card within the 5-year period, but most certainly within that 7-year period. Sometimes, we have to wait longer because the US company was not able to carry out the aggressive business plan. Okay, so it just depends on your specific situation. And so that's what I have to cover on the L1. And at this time, I can take some questions.
Yes, there are a couple of questions, and then we'll move on to the next one. We are over the time, but this is wonderful. I mean, I love the presentation. Thank you so much, Snehal. Okay, now this question is coming from Mr. Harish Asrani. He says, can I become the partner in the existing US company, or is it compulsory to transfer of funds?
Okay, so this is not a yes or no answer. Whether you can become the partner in the US company will depend on the ownership and makeup of the foreign company. If you are looking to transfer yourself in the US on the L1, we have to make sure that the relationship between the foreign company and the US company is established. So if you have majority ownership, at least majority ownership in India, then you can become a partner in the US entity, and you would have to be a majority partner, at least 51%, so that we can show there is a qualifying relationship. Okay, and then in terms of the investment amount, if we can establish the 51% in the US and the majority in India, then it's going to depend on, how much investment are they requesting from you. It's not substantial. It really depends on the needs of the business and what the plans are for expansion.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, now Manmeet is asking, what's the time frame within one has to start hiring?
If you plan to file the initial L1A, you have to be ready to hire within the first few months of your arrival on the L1, because we're looking at that 12-month period. So I would say as soon as possible.
Okay, and is there any minimum number of hires annually that one has to adhere to?
My minimum is 3 plus the manager that's being transferred, okay? But it depends on the needs of the business. So if the business is going to be doing primarily the e-commerce sales in the US, then you don't really need a lot of personnel. However, we're going to have to show that you do have employees. And so those types of employees might be sales, marketing, logistics, warehouse. So those are the type of employees that you would need.
And they don't necessarily have to be US citizens, or they.
Correct. No, they just need to be the US. The US company is a separate legal entity outside of who are the owners. Okay, in the US, it's a legal entity which has a tax ID number. That company can hire an individual who is authorized to work. The company needs to have an I-9 form for each employee they hire, so they have to verify the individual's ability to work, whether or not they're a US citizen.
And they have to be paid as per the US wage laws.
That's right. They need to be paid the minimum wage, at least for that state. Okay, so each state in the US has different minimum wages, but the type of employees generally that the L1 requires are not minimum wage workers. Okay, so I want everybody to keep that in mind. So if you're, let's say you buy a franchise and you have, you hire some people who are a restaurant franchise, and you have some cashiers, some waiters, okay? And I like to give this example because you might have a large workforce, but those are not necessarily the employees that a manager or executive would be managing. So you still need to have at least one professional under you, okay, that is going to be managing those subordinates that you then oversee.
Okay, so last question. What about the Social Security and insurance at the time of subsistence of L1A?
So the Social Security is going, I'm assuming that means getting a Social Security number. Is that the question? Can we get further?
Yes, and insurance.
Elaboration?
Yes, but I think that that's what it is. No, yeah, Manmeet says yes to that.
Okay, so the L1 applicant, once they get their visa and approval, they travel to the US and they apply for a Social Security number. They can get paid in the US. And I know there was a question earlier about coming on the B1 and working. So let me also address that at the same time. You can come to the US on the B1 on behalf of your foreign company, okay, as a business visitor to conduct business for the foreign company. You cannot be working for the US company and getting paid in the US on the B1 because you're not authorized to work in the US. You're not entitled to a Social Security number on a B1 visa. On the L1, you can't have a Social Security number. And the other interesting thing about the L1 is that you don't have to be paid in the US on the L1. So the salary can actually be paid still by the foreign company in India when you are in the US. That's not a problem at all.
Wow.
We do that quite often.